Hi, in this video we're going to define leadership and cover some of the major approaches to studying leadership. But first, let's define leadership. Ralph Melvin Stogel once wrote that there are almost as many definitions of leadership as there are people who have tried to define it. So before we move on, why don't you pause the video for a minute and think about how you would define leadership. And if you're up to it, why don't you go ahead and share your definition in the comments. I'd love to see what you come up with. Okay, now I don't think there is one correct definition of leadership, but let me share one that I think is helpful. So Peter Nordhaus is known for effectively summarizing the existing research in leadership studies, and he says that leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. And I think that's a pretty helpful and pretty comprehensive definition. Now, those who study leadership generally fall into one of four camps. We have the trait approach, the skills approach, the behavior approach, and the situational approach. Now, let's look at each of these in a little bit more detail. So, the first approach we'll discuss is the trait approach. Now, what is the trait approach? Well, it's an approach based on the belief that a good leader possesses a set of characteristics, qualities, and attributes, and generally those traits are fixed. They don't change over time. Now, a strength of the trait approach is that it matches our general conception of leaders and who they are. It is the most widely researched approach, and it's also helpful in selecting leaders and potential leaders. Now, some of the weaknesses are that there is no definitive list that has been developed on the traits. Now, we are going to cover here in just a little bit some of the most commonly cited traits, but there is actually no definitive list. It also fails to account for the different needs that arise in different situations. Finally, it's actually has limited usefulness in training programs. Okay, now even though there is no definitive list, these 5 traits are the ones that come up most often in trait-based leadership research. So those 5 traits are intelligence, self-confidence, determination, integrity, and sociability. So generally, people who study leadership traits come up with these 5 as traits that good leaders possess. Okay, the next approach we'll discuss is the skills approach. Now, what is the skills approach? Well, it's an approach based on the idea that a good leader possesses certain abilities that can be developed. Now, these abilities, these skills, unlike traits, skills are things that can be developed. Okay, so that gets us actually to our first strength, is that anyone can develop skills, so a skills approach makes leadership accessible to anyone. Another strength of the skills approach is that it provides structure for leadership development programs. Now, a couple of the weaknesses are, first, the presence of skills actually does not predict performance. So that's a pretty significant weakness of the skills approach. Also, the skills approach has been largely developed studying military, and it hasn't been validated in contexts outside of the military yet. So that's another weakness of the skills approach. Now, Robert L. Katz said that leaders need 3 kinds of skills. Technical skills are skills related to things, maybe like mechanical things, financial things, right? Basically the technical areas that have to do with maybe the leader's day-to-day work and or the technical skills that are done by the people who follow that leader. Leaders also need human skills, and as you can guess, right, these are skills that are related to the interactions with other people. Finally, Katz says that good leaders need conceptual skills, and these are skills related to ideas, concepts. So you may think of like, coming up with new ideas, thinking about the future, thinking strategically. Okay, all those are what we mean by conceptual skills. So again, according to Katz, leaders need to develop skills in all 3 of these areas. Next, let's look at the behavior approach. So what is the behavior approach? Well, it's an approach that focuses on the things that a leader says and does. Okay, so if you're keeping track, the traits approach is based on kind of innate traits that don't change over time. Skills are things that can be developed, and then behavior is focused on what leaders actually do. Okay, so a couple of the strengths. Number one, it does effectively predict leader success. And it's actually pretty easy for leaders to understand and to implement. Now, some of the weaknesses, though, is that it's unclear how behaviors actually lead to better outcomes. It's also based on perceptions of behavior rather than actual behavior. What we mean by that is a lot of the research on the behavioral approach is done by maybe surveying the followers of a leader. And, it's possible that the leader's actual behavior and how the followers are seeing the behavior don't exactly line up. All right. Now, there actually is no universal list of effective behaviors, so that's another weakness. And it doesn't account for the different needs of different cultures or different situations, so it's not as adaptive as it might need to be. Now, one of the best-known models related to the behavior approach was developed by Robert Blake and Jane Moulton. They said that leadership behaviors can be broken down by the amount of concern they show for people and the amount of concern they show for results. Okay, so if we look at this 2x2 matrix then, right, we have high concern for people, low concern for people, high concern for results, low concern for results, okay? And we can kind of break this into a 2x2 matrix, with kind of a middle of the road category in the middle as well. So if we look at maybe leaders who have, well, let's start with leaders with low concern for results and low concern for people. Blake and Moulton call this impoverished management. I would simplify it and just say this is just clear bad management, right? It's management that, if you don't care for either results or people, what are you doing, right? Now, if we move up into high concern for people, low concern for results, this is what Blake and Moulton call country club management. Okay, so this kind of leadership, everyone maybe is happy, they feel good, but things aren't really getting done. All right. Now, if we take the opposite of that, we have high concern results and low concern for people. We end up with what Blake and Moulton call the authority compliance management. Okay, and this is where maybe things are getting done, but the leader is maybe really harsh, really driving people, but doesn't give. People don't really like working in that kind of environment. So according to Blake and Moulton, the highest form, the most effective form, is what we call team management, where you have both high concern for people and high concern for results. And again, Blake and Moulton say that this is the most effective. But we do have sometimes what we call middle-of-the-road management. That's also just kind of in the middle, right? Maybe medium concern for results, medium concern for people, and sometimes you can get a little bit of the best of both worlds, but you're probably also getting the worst of both. So, all right. Finally, we're going to discuss the situation approach. So what is the situation approach? Well, it's an approach based on the belief that different situations call for different kinds of leadership. Now, some of the strengths are it's actually the most widely used approach, especially in leadership development. In fact, 400 of the Fortune 500 companies actually use this approach in their own leadership development programs. It's also easy to understand and apply, which is probably why it's widely used. And it's also flexible and adaptable. Now, some of the weaknesses are it's not strongly validated by research. So it's pretty popular because it's easy to understand, but it's not actually strongly validated. And actually, some of the terms and concepts have actually not been clearly developed or defined. So practically very popular, but as far as the research goes, maybe not as strong as the others. Now, Ken Blanchard and Paul Hershey developed a model that actually helps us understand how leaders can respond to different situations. So basically they said that leaders need to adjust their level of supportive behavior or directive behavior depending on the situation. So what do we mean by that? Well, supportive behavior, this is kind of the concern for people, the making people feel good about what we're doing. Directive behavior is right where you're telling people exactly what to do. Okay, so under Blanchard's, we call this SL2, right? So you can think of Situation Leadership 2. Under this model, with supportive behavior, if the follower is less committed, we provide more support. If the follower is more committed, we need to provide less support. Okay, and if we look at the directive behavior, if the follower is more competent, we need to provide less direction. And if the follower is less competent, we need to provide more direction. Okay, so let's put that into a 2x2 matrix as well. We can kind of see the different leadership styles depending on where the people are kind of in this matrix. Okay, so if the person you're leading has high commitment and low competency, right, meaning they're really excited to be here, but they just don't have a lot of skills, okay, then we call that the right approach is the directing approach, okay, and that's where we provide a lot of direction and little support, okay. Now, if they have low competency and low commitment, okay, we move into coaching, okay, so we provide support and direction, right? So we're trying to help bring them along emotionally and giving them very explicit and clear instructions. Now, moving down to the high competency, if we have high competency, low commitment, okay, we maybe adopt the supporting style where we give a lot of support and maybe little direction, right? They know what they need to do, but we just need to bring them along emotionally. Now, if they have high competency and high commitment, okay, then we can move into what they call the delegating mode, which is where we basically just say, here's something that needs to get done. I trust you. I know you can do it. And we kind of let them go off and do their own thing. So that's the Blanchard's SL2. And that kind of gets us through all four of the major approaches. Now, what I'd like to know is, what approach do you think is best? Or do you think a combination of two or more is better? So I'd love to see your thoughts, and go ahead and put that down in the comments. And so, okay, that's it. And thanks for watching.